to the Style My Mind podcast. On this show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of fashion and psychology with the world's most inspiring people. Our mission is to unlock the power to become the best version of yourself by turning their wisdom and knowledge into practical advice. Join us today as we explore how understanding something called sartorial cues can help you dress for success with our very special guest, Tessa West. Tessa is a professor of psychology at New York University, specializing in the science of interpersonal communication and social relationships, particularly within workplace settings. Her previous book, Jerks at Work, explored the dynamic of toxic workplace behavior, making her an authoritative voice on how interpersonal interactions influence work environments. In her latest book, Job Therapy, Finding Work That Works for You, has just launched, where Tessa delves into why people often feel dissatisfied in their jobs and how to solve that. I am so ecstatic. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Well, so am I, and I'm certain that my listeners will be also very, very curious about what you have to say. You have built an impressive career at the intersection of psychology and workplace dynamics. Could you maybe share with our listeners what initially drew you to this field and what continues to drive your passion for understanding interpersonal relationships in workplace settings?
Sure. I actually started doing research in a social psychology lab in college when I was 18, when I was a freshman. And at the time, I was actually working in retail. I was selling men's shoes at Nordstrom's, which is kind of like a high-end retail store in the States. And I found the dynamics totally fascinating. In fact, I loved them so much. The first chapter of my first book on the Kiss Up, Kick Downer is based on a shoe shark, a guy who stole all my customers from me and made all the commission, all the rich old guys. He stole them all. And I found this like so fascinating how people are jockeying for status, how we use stereotypes about people's appearance, about people's clothing. And people working in retail know this. You walk in, immediately a salesperson is going to make an impression of how much money you have, how much money you're going to spend, what they can talk you into. And I found those dynamics so fascinating. And so while I was working in downtown Santa Barbara, California, selling shoes, working in retail, I joined a lab that studied interpersonal dynamics and really focused on how, when we're uncomfortable, how we manage that discomfort. And we would put people through all kinds of awkward social situations and we'd measure their physiology. I was in one study, this is actually the coolest study I've ever been a part of, where we are interested in stigma. So this idea that you're interacting with someone who's stigmatized. The person who ran the study, Wendy Berry Mendez, she painted a giant birthmark on the faces, like a Gorbachev-style birthmark on the faces of one of the research assistants, and then watched what people did when they interacted with that person and how stressed they were. So she actually hired someone from the MAC makeup counter to come over, paint their face, either in like normal foundation or in this birthmark, so you didn't know what condition you're in, and then looked at how the over the top sort of nice things that we do when we're uncomfortable. So that was kind of my introduction to social psychology. It's cool. We study awkward interactions. We have MAC makeup counter people, and bringing that together with my history in retail. And I just found those dynamics fascinating. So I went on to graduate school to study interpersonal interactions in all kinds of contexts, from doctor-patient to cross-race interactions to international interactions in Abu Dhabi, and then kind of bringing in the workplace stuff, looking at things like asking a boss for a raise or how you negotiate, all those kinds of things. But really my passion for this started very young, working in retail, observing mankind at its best and also at its worst, and just fascinated by those dynamics. And I think that's really what kind of fueled me to study these things.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And hey, maybe it inspires someone else to step into your footpath. So yeah, fantastic. So as you just spoken to, you're exploring like a very wide range of topics within the toxic workplace behavior range to sartorial cues in professional settings. What motivates you to dive into these areas, and how does your work aim to impact the way we understand and navigate our professional lives?
So I think sartorial cues is kind of a fancy way of saying how our clothing and appearance, so not just what you wear, but how you do your hair, what jewelry you wear, what your makeup is, all of these things shape the impressions that we make of people, and often on the order of milliseconds. We decide what we think someone's gender is very, very quickly before we've even consciously processed it. We've kind of done this. And, a lot of my early work studied first impressions. It studied, how watching someone's gait, how they walk, how they dress shapes what you think that person's going to be like, activates stereotypes about that person that are then kind of stuck with you throughout the interaction. And what I found early on in my work, I worked with a woman named Nalini Ambadi who came up with this term called thin slices. This idea that you can say, look at a very thin slice of someone's movement or appearance. You can even watch someone kind of walk across the room, but behind a sheet. So you can't see what they look like, but you can see their body. And we make all kinds of beliefs about their sexual orientation, their gender, their status. And once we've made up our mind about those things, it's very hard to override them. It's like a first impression is worth like 3 hours of sort of actual content. And I found that understanding how those first impressions shape the whole tenor of an interaction is really fascinating. Whether people remember that their partner says certain things consistent with those stereotypes, whether their beliefs about their sexual orientation because of how they wear their hair or their makeup, how that then influences how nice they are to them, how they negotiate with them. And so all those juicy cues that I've been studying really started with this fascination of what a thin slice can really do to shape an interaction, and how hard it is to override those things, how difficult it is for us to say to ourselves, well, I think they look like a slob, but I'm going to try not to read too much into that. And we can't. Once you've gone there, it's very difficult. And I think a lot of us underestimate the strength of these things. And we tell ourselves, appearance doesn't matter. Who cares? We shouldn't care. It matters. And those things get activated, and they're often stereotype based. And so that's really where I've gone in a lot of my work. And I try to convince people, even if you don't think these things matter, they actually do on like a really basic neurological level.
That's fascinating. And yeah, as much as we would like to dismiss first impressions, and as much as we would like to not be prejudiced towards other people, it's unfortunately how we're wired. So yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this. You've taken away already like 3 questions that I wanted to ask you, so that's even better.
I'm having to share my own experiences too. Like I had some pretty crazy, wild things. Like I started this job at 26 at NYU, and when I was interviewing, I remember people telling me when I was a grad student, no one's going to take you seriously unless you wear glasses. No one's going to take you seriously unless you buy a suit. And so I have contacts on. I'm like, I have terrible vision, but I never liked glasses. And I went out and I remember going and buying glasses so that I would be taken seriously. It didn't matter what my work was. I'm like, all right, I got to go to lens crafters. This professor said, like, you're not getting the job without the glasses. So off I go. So we get this advice all the time in our lives, and we just sort of believe it, or be afraid by it. And I've personally been on the receiving end of a lot of that. As a young woman I'm a statistician. I don't look at 26, didn't look like your typical statistician. So I've been on the receiving end of that kind of stereotype versus reality juxtaposition quite a bit in my own life.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Me too, by the way. Like not only with how I look, like as an example, I'm in my early 30s. I already have very gray hair, which is very unusual, I guess, for the wide range, or a lot of people color their hair. I decided to just go with it because I think it's cool and different.
It is cool. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, I can totally relate with having the pressured feeling of needing to fit in to just succeed. And we still do have to fit in because we're social beings, at least to a degree. But it's very tough to navigate that balance. Do you have any tips from your experience how to navigate it?
I think the one thing is I wish if I could go back to my past self, I'd say, do not try to look like a person who you're not. And I think this is something that it sounds trite and obvious, but now that AI can create all of our headshots for us and make us look like a version of us that is way hotter and younger than it, and we're so tempted to just filter. The temptation is there. And the temptation is to follow what everyone tells you you ought to do. But the best piece of advice I've ever been given is look like yourself. And by that, I mean, look like what is a comfortable presentation. If you wear contacts and not glasses, don't go buy those glasses. Don't style your hair in weird ways or buy outfits you're not comfortable with on a job interview just because someone says you ought to look a certain way. And often that way is the stereotype of like a typical CEO or something, basically like an older man. It's like we're all just trying to like fit into that category. And I wish I would have just said like, screw you, I'm going to wear my outfit. It's going to be professional, but I'm not comfortable in glasses. Of course, they fell off like the whole day and I wasn't used to them and I was preoccupied, right? If you don't want to dye your hair, don't dye your hair. If you want to, so just do what's comfortable and find the best version of that for all these kind of self-presentation roles. Doing that knowing that people are still going to make judgments of what you look like. This idea that we can override appearance is just a fool's errand. People will make those beliefs, but you have a lot of control over sort of what that narrative is and how you present yourself. And then also, I think you can be really explicit in how we talk about it. I think there used to just be this belief that you couldn't bring up looks and appearance because it's taboo. But I think talking about this, I mean, with my students, before we go on job market talks, I talk to them about what they're going to wear. And it's not like you're going to look hot or bad. It's like, you need to be comfortable. Don't buy pants that are too tight that every time you sit down, it's gonna, like, don't wear heels if you don't wear heels. It's just like, it's about comfort and about feeling like yourself. And I think that, and then whatever you do, do not over filter all these photos of yourself. I feel like a lot of us feel like we get catfish now. Like it's like, who are you? Because of this urge to look younger and whatever than you actually are. And I feel like just be your genuine self, find the kind of best version of you. And don't lean into whatever trends there are out there. One of my colleagues talks about shoulder pads research is like trendy, stupid research topics that don't work. And she calls it that because shoulder pads go in and out of fashion and you don't want to just follow all that stuff. Like find your comfortable space. I'm also 43 and I'm all about tailoring and not trends. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's amazing. I mean, I want to just tack on to some advice there as well, because it's fantastic. And I think that's where a lot of people can already start off with. But also, it's so important that you listeners, that you start thinking about who you want to be. Not necessarily who you are at the moment, unless this is where you want to be forever and you're super happy. And then you already dress kind of automatically how you feel best. But, just take time out of your day and try to figure out who do you want to be and dress for the job you want or dress for who the person you want to be and bolster that feeling there. So yeah, thanks so much. That's fantastic advice. I think navigating dress codes in business settings can be very difficult because oftentimes there are dress codes or there are unspoken dress codes.
Yep.
I worked in the fashion industry for 10 years. Every business kind of had different expectations how you have to dress. Some were like, yeah, just go crazy and look super creative. Other people and other supervisors were like, all black glasses, hair sleek back, black turtleneck, just as blank as you can.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of hard to navigate. So I'm very grateful that you shared that with the people that you're surrounded with when you're going on job markets or whatever, that there is transparency around like, what is the expectation and how can we, also look like a unit, but not too unity, if that makes any sense. So thanks so much for sharing that. Speaking of context of business, in your new book, Job Therapy, you touch upon the deeper psychological need that influences job satisfaction, which is so, so important, especially if we look at the current situation of the job market and a lot of people trying to figure out with AI taking also a lot of jobs away or maybe being reduced down or being reframed, how can we feel satisfied at our job nowadays, or how can we find new jobs that might satisfy us? How do you see sartorial cues playing a role in fulfilling, or on the contrary, fail to fulfill these psychological need at work?
I love this question, sort of bringing together sort of how we present ourselves with finding a job that we love. I think so. In the book, I really sort of I think about your career as like a relationship partner. So that's kind of like my entry point is pretend that your boyfriend is your job. And you're gonna have this relationship that goes in and out. You're satisfied, you're dissatisfied. Feel strongly identified with it, you don't. And I think understanding sort of what the psychological triggers is important, but I think some of the categories I talk about, like the identity crisis person, how you appear and what you wear and what you dress really is highly related to your identity. And what I actually find is kind of fascinating is that people who feel very identified with their jobs, and this is something that we see in a lot of walks of life, a lot of spaces in the world, you tend to sort of show that in your appearance. And you know, for me, once I got tenure and took on more leadership roles, I started dressing a lot more formally at work, like business casual almost. But I'm definitely an exception rather than norm in academia. In fact, my grad students asked me yesterday, how is it that you wear heels every day? And how tall are you actually? Like, we have no idea. 5'1", 6 feet, like we don't know, and I realize I'm projecting this image that's highly related to the identity of a career that maybe I don't even have quite yet, but I my toe is in it, and so I didn't even. It's a much more kind of subtle thing. So I think when you think about your job satisfaction, that comes from a deep psychological place, but also just look at what you put on when you get up in the morning, and not what impression is that conveying, but what is that telling you about what part of your job you identify with the most, and what parts are you actively rejecting. I think that's also important too. I mean, I know lots of people who say they tell me I have to be business casual, but screw that. I want to wear jeans and a t-shirt and I'm going to own that. And that's telling them a lot about themselves. I also think so we can gain some insight into just sort of like being objective observers of our own appearance and what we're actually like conveying. But I also think there's an important lesson there about implicit norms. And so you brought up this idea that often there are beliefs about what ought to wear. Or is it like all black, turtleneck slacks, red lips fine, pull your hair back kind of thing that no one tells you, but it is actually an expectation. And I think when we go into a new career, there's a world full of implicit subtle norms. There's no handbook that tells you to wear that. You only realize when you show up to work in the wrong outfit that you violated that norm. And I think the hardest part about career transitioners is being a newbie, being a newcomer. And that's one of those lessons where there's nothing worse than walking into a room at work and going, oh God, I'm wearing the wrong outfit. Like, I stand out in all the wrong ways. And I think that's one of those kinds of newcomer status norm things that we don't talk about. When we talk about the hidden curriculum at work, we don't talk about that. But it definitely looms large. And then I'll add a third point, which is if you come from a different social class than the environment in which you're now working, you feel that. I grew up blue collar, pretty poor, relative to the other people in my world. And I felt like my clothes were shabby and I looked stupid and I didn't know how to dress for a very long time. And I feel like that's also a common experience, not just when you're entering a new industry or field, but a new social class, like jump on the ladder from what you were used to, from how your parents dressed, from what they wore at work. And that's something that we also don't talk about, but sartorial cues in social class, I have a paper on this. They're huge. They absolutely signal it. People make judgments of you. They'll talk to you differently based on it, and so on and so forth. That's a very long-winded answer. Sorry. I like that question so much. You got like 3 minutes. That was really long.
No, that's amazing. No, like I love the answer, to be honest. And it actually made me like realize something. First part of your answer. And then also when I read your book, it kind of I used your book a little bit to reflect through my career in the last decade and more. So I was kind of like, okay, so what happened when I exited that job? And what happened when I actually did the big pivot into psychology, which was insanely scary for me because I'm dyslexic and I was not sure if I can handle the academia part of it, but I did it and I made it because I really wanted to do it. And I wanted to identify myself with it. But it kind of made me now realize with your answer, I had actually a job where I was in the beginning so happy with. Like I was like dressing and I felt like I was that was me. This job was me. Like I could, when I met new people, I was like, okay, I'm a fashion designer. That's what I do. That's who I am. And nothing could go above and beyond that. But then I started to realize over a period of time that in the beginning, I was dressing up a lot and I was fitting into this kind of picturesque image of being a fashion designer, and it made me totally feel me. But over like a span of time, I started to actually dress less exciting. So I didn't feel the dopamine rush in the morning anymore. It was
I
tough
know
for me.
that feeling. Yeah.
It was tough for me to get out of bed. And then on top of it, like I kind of, I didn't want to put much effort in the morning anymore. So I kind of let go of that identity, but also I stopped dressing how I felt best at the time. And then when I tried dressing back into that feeling, I felt like I was wearing a costume. And that was
Yeah.
when I realized I have to exit because it's just not me anymore. So that was really interesting now because it did a lot in my brain with what you were speaking to just now and what input I had from this book of yours. For everyone listening, I highly, highly recommend reading this book if you are in a spot where you don't know what to do, or where you are unhappy with what you do. It's really interestingly written as well because it's kind of like a coaching session that you get within the book. So it's really, really exciting. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that and the food for thought. In your work, you have seen sartorial cues influence perceptions of leadership and authority. We've also spoken how it has affected us in the past as well. What advice would you give leaders actually about
Mm.
using fashion to enhance their leadership presence and underline their authority?
Ooh, so what should these leaders be conveying to
Yeah.
kind of enhance their threat? So the kind of classic study we did, or my colleagues did, I wasn't on this paper, was the suit sweat study. So they actually had two strangers come in, and one of them was randomly assigned to put on a suit, and in one condition, and then another condition they put on like sweats, like a cute Adidas one like outfit, but not a formal suit. Then they had them negotiate, and they found that in the condition, and these are just totally randomly assigned, in the condition where, and these are all men, the man was wearing the suit, he out negotiated his partner. And his partner was, a little bit more submissive, but the effect was really on the person wearing the suit. They felt much more authoritative and they were much more direct. And they did all these subtle negotiation behaviors that we know matter, like information seeking. So I'd say for leaders, often leaders are taught that what they wear is about what impression they want to convey. How often are we told, how do you want to appear to other people today? But we don't think very deeply about how those clothes are affecting our own self perception and how they can become a self fulfilling prophecy with our own actions and behaviors. So I think leaders need to think very critically, one, about how what they wear shapes themselves. What makes them say, often in leadership, we're looking for dominance, but what actually makes you a more open communicator with your team about giving feedback? What is more likely, going to lead you to say, have a useful conversation following a failure with someone? And sometimes what that means is actually knocking down your status a little bit and looking more approachable. Sometimes it means the opposite. But you really have to kind of understand what your behavioral goal is, and then what you're wearing shapes that behavior goal within the context in which it's happening. And so often these clothing choices interact with the context. If you're a CEO and you're wearing a suit and you're also behind a desk, being behind a desk is a huge predictor of dominant behavior. That's going to shape your actions in a way that's a little bit different than, say, if you're wearing that suit, but you're walking around a coffee shop or you run into someone outside. And so sometimes the effect of those cues get turned on or off by certain environments. And I think the best thing you can do, and this is something I talk about in my book, is collect data on yourself. When I'm wearing this or when I appear this way, how dominant do I feel? How assertive am I? How approachable do I feel? And then also kind of keep track of how other people are interacting with you. I think the other thing too is, we mentioned identity and what identity you want to convey. There's this whole movement in tech of like wearing like a t-shirt and jeans and like we're the casual group here. And it's sort of this like forced narrative of appearances. Appearance is who we are, which is casual. I feel like that stuff is a little overwrought and trying too hardy. As leaders, I'd say wear the clothes you're comfortable with and don't go with this kind of uniform approach, because it makes people feel like they have to line up with that uniform, and even if they're not comfortable in it. And as you think through this, be sensitive to cross-cultural differences in what people want to wear, what they're comfortable in, and don't feel like you have to force a look on your
Mhm.
organization. I am the black t-shirt and jeans company, and like that's what we all wear here. No, like sure, that's your weird uniform, but I'm gonna wear my suit today, and that guy's wearing a Speedo, nothing else. So it's like you do you, but don't force an identity through sartorial cues that feels a culty. And I think we see that a lot in organizations or jeans day. I don't know. I hate that stuff. I find it contrived identity formation. And so I think those are the main things. Think about what you're wearing and how it makes you feel interacting with the contacts, and don't force these weird uniforms on people at work. Because it's comfortable for you doesn't mean it'll be comfortable for them. I also do a lot of cross-cultural research. So like women in hijabs, they wear them differently depending on where they come from in the Middle East, or other countries. And they are going to have their own set of beliefs around things like that. So you often don't even know what's going on with other people's sartorial choices. And keep that in mind as a leader too, that you can't force things because you might be forcing something that doesn't fit in their cultural box.
That's such a good point. And I now had to think about if for my company and for the people that I have surrounded with me that work with me, I keep the hierarchies quite flat because I think that we only work as well together as we can together. But I always I had a lot of interviews when I was discussing with people who wanted to come onto my team. They were asking me like, so what is like the dress code for the business and how do you
Mm-hmm.
have to dress up? What are your expectations in your team? How people should dress? And they were so confused when I told them that you should wear whatever makes you feel the most you.
You're like, no, but you tell me what that is. I need
But
that answer. Sometimes uncertainty is terrible. So you're like, here's what it is.
fair enough, but I also I always like to then reply and be like, I want to get to know you and I want to come with you onto a personal level so we can be honest with each other and have a very good team dynamic. For me, this is so important, and for me, dress comes big into play. A lot of people don't care about clothing much either.
Yeah.
On the other hand, so that's fine too. But then, just dress in what you feel comfortable with, and as long as it's work appropriate. I don't need someone in a Speedo in the office,
Yeah.
especially if we are client facing, might not be necessarily the best idea. But
Yeah.
you
Of
know,
course. Yeah.
finding the right balance there. I think that's a good thing. But yeah, it's such a new kind of approach in leadership, especially to try to meet people on eye level and not force a t-shirt, t-shirt, black shirt, jeans kind of, uh, as you said, a cult. We don't want to do that. I want
Yeah.
an amalgamation of very interesting individuals working together. So that's maybe also what the listeners who have young startups or who are currently exploring leadership in their own life, what you can take away from this. So that's amazing. Thank you. Speaking of what we just spoke to, like that you are also looking into cross-cultural and other intersections of human beings. Do you have any advice for women specifically? Because I still feel like women still have to kind of prove themselves sometimes a bit more
Yeah.
in jobs,
Yep.
at least in the Western Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm interacting in, I'm noticing that a lot. So, do you have any advice or any insights that you can share?
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with this a lot. I think the first thing you probably want to know are what are those actual norms. So we just talked about like you can wear whatever you want, but within a certain kind of frame. I actually made this mistake. I run a lab that's mostly women because we run physiology studies and you have to put like tape on people's torsos and necks. And so the people running those experiments tend to be women because a lot of our participants are also women. And I made the mistake of saying, I want you to wear whatever you're comfortable with. And then we ran in July when it was 30 degrees Celsius in New York City, and they all showed up in like tiny shorts with lab coats where just with like their butt hanging out. And then I had to like be like, okay, I missed a norm, which is young people don't wear clothes when it's hot. And I forgot about that. And it seems silly, but I felt really uncomfortable even bringing it up. I felt like this is sexist. This is weird. So I think, the life lesson there is like, give people freedom and give women freedom, and women learn what the norms are at the workplace. You can violate them if you choose, but that should be a choice. It shouldn't be an accident.
Yeah.
And I think the best way to do that is to just get a little bit of a sampling of what other people are wearing. I talk in the book about playing an anthropologist of the workplace to learn what certain environments are like. And if you can interview in person, if it's eventually going to be an in-person job, rather than asking the hiring manager or recruiter, what's the dress code, just go there for 5 minutes and walk around and just write down what people are wearing. That's the best way you can actually learn what's acceptable. And then also notice whether people dress differently as a function of their role or their status hierarchy position. You know, a lot of organizations, everyone in law, everyone wears a suit. Doesn't matter if you're an intern in law school or if you're a partner, you kind of dress the same. But in academia, our grad students are wearing like pajamas. And then I walk into a meeting with deans and they're all wearing 3-piece suits. So it's very hierarchically determined. So those are the kinds of things you want to learn. And then within those norms, what's comfortable for you. I feel like where we try to force ourselves is say things like, everyone here is wearing heels. I don't like heels. They hurt my feet, but I'm going to buy them. And then I'm miserable all day. That's not a cue that actually matters as much as you think it does. And then, in general, just go for something that's well tailored and it doesn't matter if it's on trend. I also feel like there's a mistake we make where we spend way too much money on clothes when we first start working because we don't know what we're doing. And so we buy all this really expensive stuff to convey a level of status that we don't actually have, convey a level of financial security that doesn't reflect the reality of us. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. I'm a big fan of going and buying like vintage and real and things like that in an effort to like get around that instead of spending your whole paycheck on your clothes. And I worked at Nordstrom's. I spent my whole paycheck on clothes, So that's kind of like it's not a super deep answer, but I feel like these are kind of the missteps that we make. Or, I'm going to wear makeup and I don't normally wear makeup. Well, if you're going to like go there, don't go with like a giant smoky eye, just stay within a comfort zone and don't feel like you have to spend all this money on expensive clothes in an effort to convey that you belong here or that you can get to that status level. But play an anthropologist that is single best way. Walk into that office one day, even if you don't work there, and just walk around. See what people are wearing.
I love that. That's fantastic advice. So listeners, you've heard it. That's what is a good way to do it and how to approach it. I agree. There's no worse feeling than stepping into the office and you are like the only one with a suit, and then everyone thinks like, oh yeah, you're the CEO, but and just an intern. So yeah, it can be quite uncomfortable, and so we can avoid these, especially on the first day. You're already nervous, so yeah, it's a lot. So it's good for psychological safety to just feel as best prepared as possible, and that's part of it. You've spoken about power dynamics with clothing and how hierarchies can be shown through different levels of style. And we often hear about the power suit. I had an entire episode a couple weeks back about the power suit and Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton and everything around, like what that can do for a political spectrum. I want to stay in this podcast, of course, within the business realm, so not speaking too much about politics. But the power suit is just on every woman's mind, at least once in their life, and its impact on how leaders are perceived wearing a power suit. What does your research suggest about the effectiveness of such attire?
So the funny thing that women face, not funny, it's actually terrible, is that we can embody the same sartorial cues that men do, and then we are punished for it on a pretty regular basis. And so there's some research, and I'll take this out of fashion for a moment. Women who speak up on the Senate floor are often seen as bossy, even if they talk objectively less than men do. So I think there's all these sort of so-called power behaviors, and I would put the power suit, which is a behavior, it's a choice, right, to wear a certain thing in that category, that we are going to convey ourselves as authoritative, as in charge, that can often backfire. We're seen as intimidating, we're seen as cold, all that crap, gets thrown at us. And I've been on the receiving end of that. I've also done a lot of research in this space about how women and men are just perceived differently for doing the exact same things. So I think what does this mean? I think it means that putting on that suit doesn't mean that it's going to level the gender playing field for you in any way. Because that suit, while it makes you look professional, also conveys a level of status and leadership that people have negative stereotypes about. They have beliefs about what type of woman made it there. She must be a queen bee. She must step on people to get ahead. And not always. But I think sometimes I've been called intimidating more times than I can count, simply because I wear suits to work. And I don't know any man that's ever been called intimidating because he showed up wearing a suit jacket and pants. It's just unfathomable to even think of accusing of a man of being intimidating for wearing a well-tailored suit. It's just like, you look like you have it together. I look like I'm trying to intimidate people. And so just knowing those stereotypes exist is important. And I think, does that mean you shouldn't wear a power suit? Absolutely not. I have an Alexander McQueen power suit is my go-to power suit. I love that baby. And I do it anytime something important pops up because it makes me feel good and I look professional. But I think just that awareness is important, and that knowing that people are going to have those beliefs about you. And so, is it your burden to fix those beliefs? No. But when I'm in my so-called power suit and I look intimidating to people, I do extra steps to, break the ice a little bit. I make more jokes, things like that, just to make myself a little more approachable, because I know that this is the impression people have, whether it's fair or not, whatever, it still happens. So I think just kind of having that awareness is important. But I still think you should wear that power suit, and, in whatever form that takes for you. I think that clothing choice is about feeling in control and feeling like you are asserting yourself in a context in which you've earned your status. And that is something that women tend to shy away from. Like, you earn this status, like you can hold the floor. You shouldn't feel like you need to be interrupted all the time. It's a state of mind. And I think we can do a better job of mentoring women. And this is why I talk about clothing a lot with the women I mentor, because I do think they will say things to me like, I can't wear that. People will think I'm trying too hard when the men their age do it. And that makes me sad. And so I try to correct that a little bit. But I think, that awareness is super important.
Yeah, I love what you just said, because around counterbalancing what other people might perceive because with other behavior cues. Because I think a lot of people I have been told a lot when I was dressing up more and I was feeling more myself and whatever. Like I have many power suits. I love wearing suits because I feel like they give me the structure, and I feel way more organized when I wear it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it kind of brings that out in me. And I have one suit that I love so dearly, and it's bright red. So it's not only just the shape of it, but also the color is so vibrant. And in the fashion world, when I was going attending Fashion Week with it, people were like, "Oh my God, I love that suit. You look so amazing." But when I wear this now, some people will be like, what's that?"
Whoa.
Exactly. So, and I always told myself, like, okay, you know what? I just don't care what other people think. And it took me a long time to get there. Or at least care less, where it's not necessary to care necessarily. But what you just said is so valuable, because, if you feel like it might not be 100% appropriate, or maybe it doesn't necessarily fit in, but you want to wear it anyways, just try to counterbalance it with any other thing that you can, with any other cue you can bring onto the table. So that's such fantastic advice. Thank you so much. I know we could go on and on. We already hit the 40-minute mark. It's absolutely fantastic to talk with you. I have just a few more questions, and then we can wrap up. So, because I know time is very valuable. In your book, you are discussing the entire aspect of being not satisfied, like feeling dissatisfied with work. For those who might be feeling that, except of being able to read the book, but feel maybe dissatisfied or are not aware that they're actually dissatisfied, how can reassessing their sartorial choices serve as a first step towards finding work that better meets their psychological needs?
That's a really interesting question. I think I talk about a lot of some of the signals of unhappiness that are maybe things you're not super prepared to think about. Things like being really sensitive to intermittent reinforcement at work, right? Like your boss is nice to you on the schedule that you can't predict. And we know that yokes people in. But I don't talk a lot about watching your own self-esteem kind of go up and down. I talk about stress. I talk about, identity and all these things. But I do think that our sartorial cues are kind of a good radar or internal signal of how we're feeling about ourselves and how good we feel about ourselves and how confident and how motivated we feel. And it's not the case that every time we get depressed, we look like slops. I actually think sometimes when we're our happiest, we look like house goblins and we don't wear real clothes. I have two looks, suits and workout clothes, and I don't know how to live in the in between. So, but I do know that when I'm feeling disconnected from my job, I'm feeling like my job doesn't love me as much as I love it, I don't put as much effort into not looking good, but looking the way that I feel confident. Um, as when I'm feeling on top of the world at my work. And so I think you can look at your choices of what you wear, how much effort or, what types of effort you're putting into your appearance is a little bit of a barometer of how you're feeling about your job. And, I've had these interesting conversations with people where they'll get on a coaching call and they'll be in a suit and they'll be in the office. And then the next time I talk to them, that's like, hey, did you get out of bed this morning? And they don't even have like much of an awareness that their cues are signaling to the world, but also to themselves, how they're feeling about this. And I think the canonical example of this is coming out of COVID. Like we all really struggled with knowing what we wanted, knowing our identity, understanding workplaces that we drifted apart from. We didn't know what to wear. Pants hurt in a way that like pants never hurt before. Now they hurt. They're so stiff. And, and I think that was like, you know what I mean, right? Like when pants hurt, like,
And the hair hurts too because you take the hair down and don't have it in the
oh my
mop
God,
bun
I was a
anymore.
dancer growing up and I did like all those competitions where my head had like 95 bobby pins and it was like I was in like a brain experiment. My hair always hurt, so and clothes can hurt and your feet can like those things tell you how you're feeling about yourself and your job. And you can just really look to yourself. What do I wear this week? Write it down. I won best dressed in high school and I put so much work into campaigning for that. And it was a huge identity piece for me. Like I was going to die on that hill. Like I needed to be in the yearbook as best dressed. And I remember thinking like, this is such an important piece of my identity. I need to convey X on a Monday, Y on a Tuesday. But it was wrapped up in my self-esteem. And not everyone does, but I think most of us, even if you don't give a crap about what you wear, listeners, there are things that you're signaling to yourself or choices you make about comfort that will tell you how you're feeling about yourself, your self-esteem, and also your job. And also how much you care about what people at work think about your appearance or making, impressions of you based on that. How much social comparison you're engaging in. Like kind of one interesting thing I found is a lot of people dress up and I say, why are you wearing all those clothes? You have like 15 band-aids on your feet. Like, I know you're not here for this. And they're like, well, because so-and-so is also up for promotion and like she wears those shoes. And so they like find one thing to engage in social comparison on and like think that that's what's going to matter for success. And it's like you're kind of chasing a false allure. So all those things tell you how you're feeling about yourself, who you're comparing yourself to, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Makes me think back to your book again, where you compared work with a relationship with like a significant other. And I think you can even twist it and be like, okay, so think for a moment you're in a relationship with yourself and you're going on a date with yourself by going to work. How much are you excited to meet yourself at work? So,
I
because
love
I
that.
know that when you go to a first date, like I dress up to the T's, like I'm like dolled up entirely. And when you're like starting to feel like, oh, you're drifting out of a relationship or something, and then you don't really care as much anymore necessarily. So why don't you even like flip that and look internally and see like how is the relationship with yourself? How excited are you to dress up for yourself for the day, for your job? It's very
I love
multi.
that. I would also say that one of the biggest predictors in the relationship literature of what makes you get into an on again, off again relationship with someone, and I think we fall into this in the career path all the time. We try to break up with our job and then we just can't do it. The number one predictor is comfort. We underestimate how important it is for us to feel comfortable. And then when we break up with someone, we miss the comfort. We're not in love with them, but we miss not having to wear real clothes. We miss eating takeout. We miss sitting and watching Netflix and not having to talk to them. Those creature comforts are a huge predictor of getting pulled back into something that's bad for you. And I think if you work in a job that allows you to be comfortable with your appearance and your clothes, and now all of a sudden you have to like say level up. Now I have to blow dry my hair. Like that's going to take 45 minutes. Like goodbye sleep. It sounds trite, but that's a reason to go back to the old job where no one saw my hair. And it's like no one's going to admit, why did you go back to that old job you hated that you bitched about? Because I didn't have to do my hair. But that's the reason. It's not hair, it's the 45 minutes it takes to do the hair, and then I have to take an earlier train, and that means I can't watch my show at night because I need to get 8 hours sleep. It's like this whole kind of thing. So don't underestimate how much comfort matters in all the ways, including physical comfort, and temperature of the office matters as much as your clothes and what you get to choose to wear versus have to wear some kind of uniform. I talked to this, I was in the hospital with a kidney infection. And so of course I used the whole time to talk about work and to learn things. And I talked to this nurse who was like, I hate this job because I hate that I have to wear this ugly outfit every day. It makes me sad. And I was like, it is an ugly outfit and Crocs are not hot, but you're helping people. She's like, I don't care. I look down at my feet and I'm like, I hate my Crocs. So we'll see if she's still working there. But these little things actually matter to a lot of people in ways they don't want to admit to themselves, but it's okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's so tough. It's so tough to navigate that because, also like it comes back down to also routines and all of the things. And so, yeah, anyway, it's so tough to find like this mental well-being part also within. That's what I'm trying to do with my research. Try to figure out how my clothes or other people's clothes can make them feel better and make them feel mentally better, because so many people are mentally ill due to the pandemic or other factors that have come to light during that time. So I think clothing has so much power. And yes, I grew up with, if you want to look nice, you need to be uncomfortable. I disagree with that nowadays, especially more than ever. I think you should always feel comfortable in your clothing and always feel the most representative of your identity of what you wear every day. So yeah, thanks so much. This is such a wonderful conversation.
This is so fun.
I'm so glad. I know, like the intersection between fashion and psychology is quite new. Also in academia is quite new. So it's very exciting to bring this to every listener here who can tap into that world a little bit, and watch out for more research to come out around that as well. Super exciting. So yeah, but our time is unfortunately running slowly out now. I just want to ask you, if you can choose, what is one piece of advice that you want our listeners to take away from this conversation to harnessing the power of clothes and sartorial cues?
One piece of advice: wear what you like, and try really hard to have social connections with people who maybe dress in ways that you don't like, that you think conveys something about them that you're not a fan of. And I think the challenge of reach out to someone, have a career conversation with someone, find someone on LinkedIn whose photo you're like, oh, what are they trying to convey with that? I think similarity breeds liking. We tend to find people who dress like us, do makeup like us, do all the things like us, and we rarely go outside of that box. So find someone who you think looks crazy and you can understand or relate to their sartorial choices at all, and have a real conversation with them and ask them about their job and how they got there and what they love about it and what they hate about it. And if you want to, ask them why they choose to wear what they want. But a challenge for everyone is find someone whose clothing you think is appalling and reach out to them and have a fun career conversation.
Love that. Here we go, listeners. You have heard the Style My Mind challenge of this week. I hope that this challenge will help you facilitate growth and intentionality and awareness. make sure that if you feel comfortable and if the person you've reached out to is comfortable with it as well, to post your results on all the social media channels with #StileMyMind Challenge so we can see what you're up to. And yeah, thank you so much, Tessa. This was absolutely impeccable. Where can our listeners find you, your work, as well as learn more about what you do?
Sure. So if you're interested in learning more about my book, both of my books, I have quizzes, I have resources at tessawestauthor.com. One word. If you want to learn about my research, you can go to tessawestlab.com.
Fantastic. I will make sure to put all of this into our info box as well, so it's just one click away. I can highly recommend to read the research and the books because it's really mind-blowing and life-changing. So yeah, thanks so much. Thank you again, Tessa, for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share, and do all of those beautiful things. Follow us on our social media channels and visit our website for more insightful content. Always keep your head held high, embrace your journey to loving your job, and be open to styling your mind. Thank you so much.